welcome.
Thank you.
And I was just saying we had a nice chat in the week, Patrick. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our hosts today, Prakash Sharma and Piyush Krishna. Thank you very much, and you're very welcome, Patrick.
Thank you, Louise. Hi all, and a warm welcome to Patrick, who has joined us. We are all very excited here to have you on board with us. And there are a lot of questions people have in their mind, but more than the question, I think they just want to hear you talk. You are quite popular, your work, your name, the book itself. Like Louise was saying, some of us here have read your book already, but we also know many of us have not. But at the same time, what we do typically in the club is we keep on throwing tidbits from the book, right? And that's how we kind of get them hooked to the club. And also we let people get curious about the work. Yeah. And so people have been very, very curious about the book. There have been discussions about the academic side, and someone put up a note. I remember saying, my God, the amount of reference on that book is insane. So there are a lot of questions that we have, and it's going to be, one free flow Q&A. At some point of time, people will start putting up questions on the chat box. Feel free to pick up any of those questions. And Louise is going to ask, the particular person to unmute themselves and put the question to you directly. Just so that we can warm up the session for people, me and Piyush will be having a few questions, 5 to 8 questions, so that people get a sense of what is happening. And meanwhile, they also start typing in their questions to you. Patrick?
Okay, great.
Yeah. If you want to introduce yourself, please do, but I'm sure almost everyone out here already knows about you. I would dare not try to introduce you. I mean, who am I? All yours, Patrick. Let's start with a small introduction about you.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. So my name is Patrick, although sometimes I ask people to call me Pat because research says it makes me more likable, apparently. If you use a short name or a nickname, you're seen as warmer and more popular. I think I need all the help I can get there. That's the kind of thing I do as a behavioral scientist, is take academic, scientific psychology studies, research, and then practically apply them for businesses and institutions to have kind of real world tangible outcomes. So on the academic side, I'm a part-time lecturer at a couple of universities here in London. I publish papers on things from Facebook psychology to facial expressions. I've written Hooked, of course, which we'll talk about today, about the psychology of effective communications. And then on the commercial side, I've been doing consulting and psychological experiments for brands for over 10 years now. And so, for example, just to give you one example, was for eBay, looking at how background noises influence people when they're shopping online. Finding that if you are shopping online, don't listen to classical music because you'll see products as higher quality and be more likely to buy them. So that kind of thing. And then, I've done a lot of work with facial coding, ad testing, conversion funnel optimization and things like that. I think the only other thing to mention is that I was previously lead psychologist at Cambridge Analytica. Feel free to ask questions about that. But I've been working with optimizing communications, but in particular now bringing in data, big data, and using that data to understand the psychology of audiences and to target messages therein. Now I am the co-founder of Capuchin Behavioural Science. That's where I am today.
Well, thank you, Patrick. I think the first question is going to be around this certain obsession that you seem to have. I see one of your companies is called Capuchin. Yeah. The other one that you co-founded is called Brain Chimp.
Yeah.
Out of the 10 principles out there, I think the one of the first one is primal. Yeah. And out there again, you refer to our monkey brain. So what is this thing with monkeys? Would you help us understand?
Yeah. Absolutely. It's all about, as you say, the monkey brain. So that kind of emotional, evolutionarily older part of the brain that's responsible for not everything, obviously, but for the vast majority of our day-to-day decision making. It's that kind of primal, unthinking, emotional brain. And that's what I'm trying to reach with messaging recommendations and with nudges. Capuchin in particular was because of the monkey thing, but also because Capuchins are used in behavioral research a lot. So one of my favorite examples is these two Capuchins were trained to do a task and they would get rewarded for doing it. And the researchers put them side by side. And the first monkey did the task and got paid with some cucumber, which it ate. Then the second monkey got paid with a grape. And then the first monkey got paid again with a cucumber. But now, having seen the other ones getting a grape, it didn't want it and chucked the cucumber back at the researcher and started shaking the cage. So yeah, Capuchins are great. And also any brand or a brand that has a plosive phoneme like K. So if you think McDonald's, Coca-Cola, KFC, they tend to be remembered better for whatever reason. And also a Capuchin is a real thing. So it's more kind of digestible and memorable to call your brand something like Monkey rather than, I don't know, string theory. So it's all about kind of being concrete.
Thank you. Pat, you had, I think Louise was introducing you and she said something about a stand-up career. She also happened to mention, man, we are curious. Please tell us about who was Patrick like before he became the guy who wrote Hooked. What was this Patrick doing? What was his dream? And what was his journey where he turns from a stand-up comedian to a musician to this very well-known psychologist?
Well, it's really embarrassing, but it was a different time when I was very young, you know, a teenager, but I was really started to get into psychology. Well, number one, because of advertising, I just found it interesting. And there was this book, Decoding Advertisements by Judith Williamson, which is one of the first kind of proper non-fiction books that I read, really. I just found it fascinating about how these signs and symbols communicate things without people really being aware of it. But then also when I was 17 or 18 and it was kind of the zeitgeist at that time, I was interested in pickup artist kind of stuff. I'm ashamed to say it now, but you know, it's a long time ago. And that started to get me into psychology. It had some things about body language, evolutionary psychology, things like that. And so from there, for similar sort of reasons, I got into what's known as hair metal. So Motley Crue, Guns N' Roses, that kind of thing. Joined a band. It didn't work out, as you can probably imagine, but it was interesting because I was doing my psychology degree at the time, and I was starting to think about, you know, what grabs attention, what engages people emotionally, what kind of things do people like, and things like that. Why is it, you know, sex, drugs, and rock and roll? Why do those things grab people's attention? So it was, you know, it wasn't a complete waste of time. And then from there, yeah, I did marketing at King's College so that I could try and take what I learned in psychology and actually apply it and use it in the commercial sense. Yeah, I just kind of got into behavioral science consulting from there. The stand-up thing is, I really wouldn't call it a career. I did it once, or I did it twice. Once I completely bombed. The second time it was pretty good. But I thought after the second time I'll quit while I'm ahead.
Are there some findings, or is there a Patrick from those days that has carried on to this Patrick that we see out here? Any learnings or anything from those days? In fact, even if today you would have to try a career in stand-up, knowing what you know about how you can frame information for people,
yeah,
how would you do it differently? Anything you want to talk about that?
I suppose maybe things like confirmation bias and conformity, in that in other words, you need to know your audience and make jokes that people will like. You know, certain jokes will work with some crowds and not with others. But I think in the book as well, I talk about the ITPRA model. So it's essentially how stories and music and also jokes work. You kind of build a tension, and then when that tension is released, that's where the entertainment comes from. And so that's how jokes kind of work, is they take you down a garden path and then take you somewhere else, and kind of build tension, and then say something that doesn't quite make sense. And then when the audience works out how it does make sense, that's where the laugh comes from. Yeah.
Patrick, there's another thing which I noticed you mentioned about your interest, talking about music. You started speaking about those hair metal bands. You talked about GNR. And I remember growing up, GNR was one of the biggest act. Everyone wanted to be Slash, or everybody wanted to be Axl Rose.
Yeah.
And it just reminded me of this time when almost everyone I knew was listening to Maiden or Metallica or to, Megadeth. And then just like that, today, when we look back at the kind of music people are listening, there is no more that crazy worshipping of metal as an act that used to happen in the 80s and the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And early on in your book, you mentioned about, when it comes to kids versus when it comes to chimps, how is it that we learn?
Yeah.
And you say, the thing about human beings that we are social learners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is there anything that you can tell us about this rise and death of music as a trend today? It is hip hop, and it's not even gangster rap as it used to be there in the late 90s. It's more like Drake and a different kind of rap, and that is what is happening right now all over the world. So how would you interpret that as a behavioral scientist?
Well, I think whatever is kind of presented as mainstream and normal and accepted kind of becomes that. Maybe it's a chicken and egg thing, but if there's only, I think, 6 major entertainment companies in music. There's like Sony, Warner, etc. So it's actually quite a small number of companies, and so probably they kind of dictate tastes from a top-down way rather than a bottom-up. So if something's on TV and in the radio, all the time, there's this mere exposure effect, where the more you see something and the more you hear it, the more you like it. It also communicates that, I imagine there's an authority or maybe social bias where it's like, oh, if it's on MTV, or I suppose Vivo is alternative now, if it's on this mainstream popular channel, it must be good. And if it has 10 million views in a day, it must be good. And I don't know, maybe I'm getting old and curmudgeonly. It's a little concerning in a way. So I don't know if you saw that WAP music video. If we are these kind of very social animals who really follow the crowd and learn socially more than anything else, then so many people seeing certain things, I suppose could be a bit worrying. I suppose the counter argument to that is that it is bottom up, and there's kind of cultural shifts and currents and things, and they're just, people buy what reflects how they're feeling, which is true. I don't know.
This is really interesting given what's happening in the country right now here in India. A good number of people out here are from India. They're very, very interested in behavioral science, and today happens to be the Independence Day in the country. So happy Independence Day to all the people who have logged in from India out here. So we have recently had this tiny, if I may call it, scandal. We have this popular hip hop / rap artist called Badshah, which means an emperor. And the scandal happens to be around the fact that he paid close to 7.2 million rupee when he released his music video on YouTube recently. And this money was paid to buy likes. The idea was to buy a certain amount of likes and then do a social proof of sorts and build up a record saying, this is the fastest liked music video. And there is a very weird debate happening in the country, and not many in the country talk about behavioral science or social proofing or the ethical side of it, right? And then you happen to say right now, saying you have a handful of companies which are engineering trends top down. In fact, there used to be this popular thing by the Flights of Conchords called the 4-chord song, how almost any popular song could be broken. I see you smiling, so you must be knowing them very well. Almost anything can be broken down into 4-chord song. As an experiment, would it then be possible to actually engineer a massively popular band? Is that something that can be done using the right combination of music and behavioral science?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I mean, there's things like, I'm not an expert on this, but there's a certain beats per minute, which is close to a heartbeat, which makes songs more popular. And the backbeat, so 1, 2, 3, 4, which is in basically every popular song ever, that also maybe is the heartbeat, or maybe that's the pace at which people walk or something like that. Yeah, there are certain things which will, and there's a study of research on what's called earworms, which is done at Goldsmiths actually, but it's songs like, I don't know, the Macarena. There's a certain science to it that it gets stuck in your head, and you can't not have it stuck in your head, and that's something that affects everyone really, no matter your kind of education status or anything like that. And then, of course, there's certain lyrics that will use emotion and sex and things like that to be more attention-grabbing and memorable. Then I suppose, so one of the things I would have put in my book, but I kind of forgot, is, or I didn't think of it at the time, is being relevant. So we could talk about this more later, but messages need to kind of tap into some need or motivation that people have, or some way of seeing the world. And I think, yeah, if popular songs can do that, tap into kind of the zeitgeist and the current mood, then that will make them popular as well. But yeah, I think there is basically like an algorithm, more or less, that makes songs popular. Yeah.
So thanks for that. So I think it might be time to put a band together, guys, in the group. Let's see if we can do that. We have the best psychologists in the world on our side right now here with us. Feel free to keep on typing your questions, guys. And I have got, I think, 1 or 2 questions more, which I quickly want to ask Patrick. Then Piyush is going to take over. And then we're going to open up for a general question for all of us. So Louise, just keep a check on that. I got 2 questions more, and then you will have to coordinate all the barrage of questions coming down in the chat box. There were 2 questions, quick, Patrick, whichever you want to address. One is, you said non-fiction sometime back, that phrase, and you had used this word, I think, post-rationalization. And this was with respect to theories in the world of marketing. And there are a lot of them. And I happen to notice that you had discussed the ELM model, the elaboration likelihood model, in detail in your book. And there was a certain criticism that you had for this model. And in general also, there seems to be this particular, I can say cribbing, because I crib at times, right? This cribbing, which is around saying, why is it that marketeers and brand managers come from a place which is not really rooted in science, or from theories which they are taught in MBA schools, don't seem to be updated. They seem to be something which is just, so there is one question around that. Why do you think is this resistance? Is it resistance, or is it just, is it just too much of status quo? So that is one side of the question which you are curious about. The other goes around data. And this one line, almost every one of us has heard out here saying, oh, if you torture data enough, it will confess to anything, right?
Yeah.
And when you hear something like that, does it make you say, yeah, you're right? Or does it make you go like, that entire thing is such a wrong statement to form? Because how can you form wrong inferences from data?
Yeah.
So, your thoughts about those, please.
So on the first one, I think, marketers, like everyone else, like all of us, are kind of biased and prone to maybe like superstition, and to, if they've been taught that, say, differentiation works, and there's maybe confirmation bias where they've differentiated brand and sales went up, but maybe it could have been something else. But yeah, very much as well status quo bias, going along with what everyone else is doing. I think with marketing in particular, though, it could be because they're quite creative group. And so it's hard really to go to advertisers who are, creative minded, maybe even have creative education. They sit in these very funky, cool offices with graffiti on the walls and stuff like that, which is great. The creativity is great, but it's not really how they approach things. And it's hard to go to creative advertisers and say, look, here's a scatter plot that tells you why you should do this in the ad. Although, having said that, one case study that I worked on was for BBC, and they had some nature footage they wanted to turn into a trailer, and they gave the footage to a director, and she made a trailer. Concurrently, the company I worked for as well, took the footage and we subjected it to facial coding to see which parts of the footage produced the most emotional responses. And then we kind of cut those parts of the footage out and stitched them together into our own trailer. Then the third thing was we went to the director and we told her what we'd found, and we showed her the charts. We explained why certain things were more emotional than others, and she used those insights to make a third trailer. Then we took those 3 trailers and tested them again. The least engaging one was the machine, where we just stitched the most emotional stuff together. Then second was the one she had made originally. But then the most engaging one was kind of the combination of data and creativity. Man and machine, as it were, was the most effective thing. But yeah, long story short, I think that creative marketing types may not be super naturally open to data and science. But having said that, the kind of Byron Sharp, how brands grow model to branding and the increasing use of data science does seem to be taking hold of marketing for sure in the last few years, definitely.
Well, thanks. I know I said those were the last question, but we have just entered a breaking news moment. It seems just now the government of India, right, almost at this moment have announced a health ID for everyone in the country, which means all your medications, all your surgeries, all the data is going to be stored on one ID in the entire country. And this is 1 billion+ people in this side of the world. Mm-hmm. I don't even know what it means, but you play a lot with data, and you play with behavioral science, and you understand it way better than almost anybody else in the world. When you hear a news like this with us for the first time, what does it make you feel? 1 billion+ data on 180.
Yeah, well, I am a behavioral scientist, so obviously there's a certain level of excitement, and the more data that's collected and the more people are trying to change behavior, to be honest, it's good for my career. However, as a human being, my first response really is probably fear. I don't think it's good for people to be tracked and have to have this ID, and it's already there's certain conditions you have to be able to go into restaurants or to go into supermarkets, i.e. to eat food. And now to say that you have to have a passport to do things is it's a little concerning. Behavioral scientists, we look at how things have gone wrong with behavioral control in the past, and some of these things do seem like maybe little red flags, but that could just be an oversensitive fear response. I'm irrational just like everyone else.
So much, Piyush, all yours.
Cool. Thanks, Prakash. And so first of all, really cool Q&A going on. So I'm really intrigued. And secondly, I think I love the book. It's super insightful and super actionable. That's something that I really liked about the book.
Thank you.
So a question from my side. I think the book has a lot of clever experiments. My favorite experiment is the one when you quoted the choice between Israel and Palestine. So someone's given a choice between Israel and Palestine. The experimenter kind of goes on and changes their choice.
Yeah.
And then they start explaining that changed choice. So it's I really like that experiment. So what I would like to ask you is that which one do you think is your favorite experiment from the books, from the umpteen experiments that have been quoted in the book? Which is your favorite experiment?
Oh wow, that's a tough one. I don't know. I really like the priming studies, although they have been kind of potentially discredited a little bit. But I think the volume and the consistency of the studies suggests that priming effects do exist. They're just a lot weaker than people might think and a lot more context dependent. But things like if you get somebody to hold a cup of warm coffee, they like the person they're talking to more. If you get them to read about the elderly, then they walk more slowly away. Yeah, I just love those studies, but they're all good. They're all really interesting. There is one that I used to open every presentation with it, but it's hard. It's less relevant now. But there was a study where they got participants in. I don't think it's in the book, and sat them down for the experiment to begin. But what they didn't know was they were being secretly filmed. And when the researcher came in and shook the participants' hand, they filmed them. And a lot of them would touch their face around their nose. And what they were doing was they were sniffing their hand, because when you shake someone's hand, you kind of transferred sweat and pheromones and things, and it acts as a chemical messenger. Of course, nobody's doing that anymore. But that's quite a nice one, yeah.
Cool. Awesome. So what I would I think and there's also I think the cover of the book itself says how cute makes things getting hooked. So, and also you point it out, and I quote, keep track of as I think it's so actionable. You keep you give this actions as well, and you say that keep track of internet trends, just like cat videos, to see what kind of things attention and therefore are useful in messages. So what do you, which internet trend have you observed in the past year or maybe recently, which you think you want to share with us?
Internet trend. Maybe a big one at the minute seems to be kind of balkanization, as it were, of the internet. So, basically echo chambers, bubbles based on beliefs and maybe political beliefs and things that people have. I mean, it's great that the internet allows people to find like-minded people and things like that, but I think it's also potentially dangerous to not be exposed to other points of view, or to not be exposed to other points of view. Today I'm doing a literature review I'm working on, and I didn't realize just how much research there is on how dangerous or damaging smartphones and technology can be, how it can drain your ability to concentrate and make you more impulsive and make you unhappier. So I think, and then me personally, I do try and digital detox. I have a dumb phone that I try and use sometimes, but I've seen more people doing that. So I think that could be a trend to watch out for too.
Awesome. I think I think that is very relevant. I feel that the digital detox, but the only problem is that the market kind of wants to make really hooked products, and but at the same time, it's also relevant to detox a little. So
exactly.
It's a nice tussle going on between the two.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So the last one, I don't think in this current pandemic I can't ask this question, so I have to ask this. So if you had to add anything in the book in the lieu of the current pandemic, so what would that be?
Not in lieu of the pandemic, but I would have added the importance of being relevant, because if you could have a product that's just an empty cardboard box, and the advertising can be great, but no one's going to need it because most people don't need an empty cardboard box. So it needs to be relevant and tap into what people are thinking and feeling. There was an advert by Budweiser where they had a cute puppy, and it had a great story with a horse, very emotional, engaging, and memorable, but it had nothing to do with beer. So the ad was a flop. So that's one thing I'd add. Another thing I'd add is about kind of personalization more broadly. So there is a chapter on it, but I think everything that's in there more or less can be personalized, particularly the nudges stage. So some people, conscientious people, for example, are more likely to be influenced by reciprocity and commitment, so doing the right thing, whereas extroverts are more likely to be influenced by kind of identity stuff like social proof and scarcity. So that's a lot more actionable now that we have big data. You can kind of get people's personality traits through it, and target people through data. With respect to the current crisis, I'm not sure if I would add anything to this book, but definitely it has had an impact on people psychologically. I was just reading today, there's a paper a few years ago saying, doing multiple experiments showing that making people think about disease and contagion makes them more conformist. And there's something called the behavioural immune system, where if you make people feel disgust or worried about catching something, they become more kind of intolerant, more insular, more risk averse and things like that. So absolutely it's having an effect, but I'm not sure how how it relates to messaging. Maybe messaging, maybe I could have added a chapter on taking context into account, because there are certain ads which you probably couldn't make in the current climate because people would just be really not accept it very well.
That's a cool one. Cool. I think what we can do is that probably we can open the floor for other questions as well. I think Sheena has messaged a good question on in the chat window for Patrick. Maybe Sheena, do you want to read it out, or should I go and read it out? What do you want to do? Yeah, should I? Okay, fine. So the question from Sheena is that there was a survey released recently that suggested only half of the UK population would be willing to have a COVID-19 vaccine if one became available. As a behavioral scientist and data lover, how would you respond to that?
So there is actually a study, I think it was by one of the Ivy League universities in America, and they haven't done it yet, but they're currently doing it, and they're looking at how different types of messaging will make people more likely to get a vaccine. So they're looking at like guilt messaging, if you don't get the vaccine, you could hurt someone else by spreading it. They're looking at social proof messaging, oh, everyone else gets a vaccine, etc., etc. So they're to get people to take vaccine, there are multiple kind of nudges that can be used. I don't know which would be the most effective yet, but yeah, a classical kind of application of nudge theory would help there.
Yeah, cool. All right, I also see another message from Harmony. Harmony, do you want to go on and ask your question?
Hi.
Yes.
Yeah, hi, sorry. So I think I've written a few. Are you referring to the Facebook?
Yeah.
The Facebook, sort of this subject. No, I read actually an article in The Guardian a few weeks ago about Facebook's influence in terms of the advertising that's happening, and obviously that sort of loops back to your work with Cambridge Analytica. I mean, they didn't mention Cambridge Analytica, but it was sort of saying that basically, like, you could have an advertisement where you see like a Nazi image or something. And while Facebook will eventually remove these offensive images, that, by the time they remove it, 1 million people have already seen it. I don't know. It was just an interesting article about Facebook's influence on the American public and specifically about the election. So I think my question is, do you think the same thing is going to happen, or that those influences are going to play a part in the messaging that people see on Facebook?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for the record, I wasn't at Cambridge Analytica in 2016. Just for the record. But Facebook, I don't know. I mean, as far as I'm aware, they've banned political advertising, and as far as I know from having talked to everyone at Cambridge Analytica, Facebook data wasn't used to target people for political advertising, so, and not the personality data really, at least. But it is possible, and it's likely become much more sophisticated, you know, in the last 4 or 5 years. Political advertising is there on other platforms. It's also done in less overt ways, shall we say? So, you know, memes, fake news, things like that.
This is what I really worry about. Sorry, just to interrupt, because I know that there is a real problem with that, and I have, you know, just there's debate, I think, in general about what is fake news, and because, as you mentioned earlier, everyone's kind of going into their bubbles. You know, it's just sort of like this vacuum where the same information, whether it's correct or incorrect or has these biases, just keeps going and never actually, just seems to influence people heavily, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's something called the search engine manipulation effect, which is also very interesting, where the presentation of results in a search engine, particularly Google, has an effect on how people vote. And the researcher who did the research said it's one of the most powerful kind of nudges, I guess, that he's ever seen. Now that's one person, but it's still interesting. I think, yeah, it has a massive impact on us, but so we shouldn't forget there's the television and Hollywood and academia and newspapers and things like that. So it's kind of from all corners, really. And it's hard to, I think one of the biggest skills, particularly as we go into this deep fake kind of era where we don't know anything we see on the screen, you know, is it even real? Is it CGI? I think being able to be discerning and critical is going to be a major kind of skill to have in the years ahead.
Wow, sounds about right. Thanks.
Lasishar, you had a, sorry, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, so sorry if I screwed up. You had a question as well, right? And you mentioned in the chat window. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for everything and for the discussion up until now. My name is Lachezar, and I'm an evolutionary behavioral scientist and a PhD candidate in marketing. And it's funny that you mentioned that you're interested in humor and pickup lines, because the very first paper that I published was a study on pickup lines disguised as an advertising paper in the International Journal of Advertising. So I've prepared 2 questions. The first one is my main question that's really interests me the last couple of days, and the second one is a backup question. So the first one would be how familiar are you with the long and short theory of Peter and Les? Okay, you know about. I will just summarize it in a second for everybody else who is not that familiar. They basically say that effective brand communication should be based on a split between 2 activities, between brand building and short-term activation, where they say that it's recommend a split between the 2 around 60 and 40 in favor of brand compared to activation. Anyhow, I was wondering what are because it's what they're presenting is more or less of a descriptive nature. So I was wondering what are the psychological and behavioral science underpinnings of this theory.
So yeah, I'm very much on board with that, and this is, I think, is a kind of a big problem with Facebook and online advertising, is that people do it with the goal in mind of clicks, whereas actually the main goal of advertising really is about building mental availability. So putting brands into people's heads and making them as front of mind as possible and connecting them to the right things in memory. So, you know, I mean, if you're going to advertise Coca-Cola online, it's not done with the goal that people are going to click through and order a can of Coca-Cola online, or they're going to jump up from the seat and go and run out and buy a Coca-Cola. It's to kind of put it into people's heads. And there's a huge amount of research on this. For example, one priming study found that people are more like, if you ask them to name their favorite brand of candy, they're more likely to say Reese's Pieces during Halloween, because at Halloween everything's orange and all the orangeness makes Reese's Pieces front of mind, and so they're more likely to choose it. And Reese's Pieces is in fact the biggest selling candy during Halloween. There was another study where they showed people images and asked them to rate them on something arbitrary, and some of the images had bottles of Dasani water in. And then after the study, they offered people a bottle of water. They could choose between multiple brands. And they found that the more kind of subtle product placements, as it were, of Dasani, the more likely people were to choose it. So that's really what mostly, not entirely, but mostly what advertising is about, is just to get that brand into people's heads, connect it to the right thing. So if you connect McDonald's with family meals, the next time people are out with their family and think, I want a meal, that will trigger McDonald's by association. So yeah, absolutely on board with that. And they have some great research from the IPA Effectiveness Awards, which is as scientific, I think, as you can get in terms of, and standardized, I think, as you can get in terms of a marketing campaign effectiveness. So to be honest, I haven't read it, but I've seen some presentations and it will make sense to me here.
Maybe I'll use the opportunity to raise a second question. Could be a short one. Another interest of mine is our gender differences, and yeah, I was simply want to know what the most striking gender differences are in terms of communications and marketing, and how the two different in the, pardon me, the 1,000 different genders should be approached most effectively.
Well, I mean, I'm a big fan of evolutionary psychology. Sensitive subject, and you know, we should be careful of not making gross generalizations because every individual is different. However, if you're going to split the planet into two groups, 3.5 billion in each group, some fairly consistent average patterns come out between them. So for example, women tend to be more people focused, whereas men tend to be more kind of thing focused. Men tend to be better at kind of spatial reasoning, whereas women with verbal and reasoning. But it's, you know, that's, neither of these things is better than the other. It's just, and also, as I say, it doesn't apply to everyone, it's just averages. So that, I think, suggests quite clear guidelines for how to communicate. You know, being more kind of people focused and maybe more wordy and more empathetic in messaging to women. Maybe being a bit more kind of power focused in terms of values rather than kindness. Being more functional and utilitarian, and so on for men. But as I say, that's a very gross generalization. I think the thing about big data is that it allows us to target much more refined, homogeneous groups of people. So that's where you could, for example, target non-binary people and send them a message that will resonate them in the right language with the right tone and content and so on. So yeah, I suppose that's the beauty of it, is we don't have to rely on these huge buckets like male and female anymore, which might be just too broad.
Yeah, thanks. I want to add just one thing, maybe. Yeah, maybe two things that. Yeah, we evolutionary psychologists look at those differences, but we also acknowledge that there are probably more similarities between the genders than there are differences. And the second thing is that, and you pointed to this, is that that even though we can establish some differences between the genders, the within gender differences are even bigger, or could be.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
All right, so the questions are flowing in thick and fast. So it's tough for me to look in, but I think I saw a really interesting question from Deepti. Deepti, do you want to unmute yourself and tell, or if not, I can read out. Okay. So the question is that what's your opinion on the conflicts of neuromarketing and behavioral science? Is that the way?
Is there a conflict?
No, what's your opinion on the conflux of neuromarketing and behavioral science?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's I think so. Neuromarketing is a great way of understanding where things kind of come from. I think for marketing, it's difficult, at least for now, because the technology is quite sophisticated and there are barriers to it. Certainly, it's a good technology. I mean, there are things like emotive neurosky, which are okay, but I don't think they kind of get the robustness and detail that you really want from neuroscience. But I mean, neuroscience is not really my area, but every time I read it, I am fascinated, particularly in learning how the transmitters influence behavior. So obviously politics is something I'm interested in, and there's nice research showing how serotonin is linked to political behavior. So it influences voter turnout, but also political preferences, because it's related to being more threat sensitive versus reward sensitive, and more open to ambiguity versus needing structure. And these are two traits which really define your politics. So it's really interesting. I suppose there was a study where they found that if you include fMRI brain scan images in the abstract, people rate it as more believable or credible and a better study. So there is potentially, a need to just kind of watch out and not just take it being neuroscience as it having implicitly some authority. But you could say that about anything, really. You could say that about behavioral science too. And I suppose, the neuroscience does add a bit more of a traditionally hard science backup to the behavioral science, especially when it comes to social science, can be a bit fuzzy and maybe a bit unreliable. So I think it's best to look at the constellation of results. So you take behavioral science and does that say one thing, and you look at the neuroscience and it says the same thing in a different way, and maybe even look at like Jung and Freud and they said the same thing. And something I like to do as well is look at kind of esoteric wisdom and see if that says the same thing. But just taking all of these data sources and kind of triangulating them to see if they're all saying a consistent thing.
Nice. That's a nice one. That's a nice way of looking at it. Prakash, you had an interesting question on the books that Patrick reads.
Yeah, I am by now envious. Part of me is very I can't compute this. My brain is Windows 95, abort, retry, compute, abort, retry, compute. How is it that you are able to throw cases and references to almost everything that is coming down your way? How do you do it? What's your reading routine, number one?
Yeah.
And number two, I know there are a lot of people out here in this group who are still struggling with their first drafts of their books. They're like, I'm going to finish my book one day. I'm going to do it. But so what's your reading routine and what's your writing routine? Please help us become as good as you, or maybe some percentage of what you do. Help us with that, man.
Thanks, that's very kind. So yeah, I read a lot and I make an effort to read more. So I read every day for at least maybe half an hour. And I buy so many books. I buy more books than I read, and it may actually be an addiction at this stage. So I have many piles of books, and sometimes I start reading them and I kind of get the point and that's it. I should be a bit more persistent with them. And then also for work, part of my work is doing literature reviews. So I kind of get paid to learn, which is great. And then also because I work with students, I supervise their theses and, they're very careful with that word, their theses. And also I mark their essays and things. Then I'm learning new things. I mean, maybe a year or two ago, one of my students taught me that Cialdini actually now has 7 influence principles. So the 7th one is unity, I think. I wouldn't have known that if it wasn't for my students. So yeah, I love to read, but also I'm very privileged that I get to do it for a living as well.
Well, thank you. But you didn't tell us about your writing routine.
So I've heard that there are 2 types of writers. There are people that just vomit everything up and then carefully kind of cut afterwards and reshape. And then there are people who very carefully go line by line. So I think I'm the second one, but in particular, I do what I've only just learned actually is called self-regulation. So I have certain kind of metacognitive skills that I apply. So for example, I write a checklist before I ever do a piece of work. I break it down into smaller tasks. And if maybe those tasks look daunting, I even break them down into even smaller subtasks and I write them down and I scratch them off one by one. And then, yeah, that's it really. I just get stuck in and I kind of think about what the hypotheses and what ideas and things I might have. And then I look and see if research supports it or not, and try and craft a story by bringing studies into it.
So I do have one last question here. Actually, I have 2 questions, if I can. I'm getting very greedy. So one question is around, is there any research or any data which is pointing towards us human learning and adapting to the way marketing is now done? You know, hacking those biases and being thrown to us. I vaguely remember something around people being more wary of those travel sites or hotel booking sites, which says, when more people are looking at this, it seems people are learning it. So you know, what is the research on that? Are people becoming more aware? The second is around the mnemonic. So I got your book. I read it on 3rd of August.
It was the best one I could think of.
And on the first page itself, right? You're talking about the 10 principles. So I'm a lazy reader. So I thought if I don't end up finishing the entire book, I want to know the principles. So I put up a mnemonic on my wall out there which says, men are idiots. They won't ask for direction. So pass men the map.
Yeah.
And then, you know, a couple of hours later, your book was lovely. So I just, you know, canceled my meeting. I kept on reading. And then around page 140, I find, so this is the mnemonic for you, which says, pass me some map. And for a moment, I was like, how do I tell people this happened, right? So how did you get it done? Was there a particular way you put down the mnemonic out there? Or was it just a coincidence? I felt very smart for like 10 seconds. I was like, my brain can think as smartly as Patrick. So thank you for that. But was that some thought out there or it is just a coincidence?
Just a coincidence. Yeah, I mean, obviously pass men map doesn't really have anything to do with effective communications, but it was like the most, I don't know, concrete, relatable, memorable thing that I could match the words to, because obviously to make a mnemonic, I had to think about what the synonyms for different words were and juggle them around in order and things. That was the best I could come up with.
It was a fantastic way. I'm really glad. It made me feel very happy. The first question that we asked was around, are we learning and are we learning how to react better to these hooks, to these hacks in the way they are being communicated to? In the way they're communicated to us. Is there a change in that?
I don't know if I've seen evidence that there's a change. You know, gut would say that there would be, and that people would habituate and learn and evolve as we always do. So the evidence that I can think of kind of goes either way. So some studies have shown that even if you tell people what a nudge is, and you tell them, you tell them, for example, what anchoring is, where their estimates of a number are influenced by seeing a higher number. If you teach them what that is, and then you tell them, we're going to use that on you now, don't be biased by it, and then you try and nudge them with it, they're still influenced by it. So it's a bit like an optical illusion, where even if you rationally know it's an illusion, you can't unsee it. But then there is also some research where people have been trained. There's like what do they call it? anti-nudging or something, some kind of, anti-nudge kind of interventions, debiasing interventions. So it can be done. And I would expect that, it's kind of like a persuasion arms race where consumers get wise to something, so brands try something else. However, these things are hardwired, and they've been hardwired for tens of thousands of years, so they may not change immediately, although then again, evolution does kind of go in very quick leaps and bounds sometimes. So, but from what I've seen, I don't think consumers are particularly kind of resistant to it just yet.
Well, thank you. Are there other questions on the chat box? That was very, very helpful. I think we'll look for more. I think there are fantastic folks out here like Melina who run this really good podcast, and we rely a lot on her to get the latest news. She gets in really fantastic speakers regularly. So we'll keep an eye for that, the research. Do we have other questions in the chat box, guys? Please feel free to put up your questions again if they were not answered. Yes, please.
I saw an interesting question coming from Omar, and on the title of your book. So, so the title of your book is the same name as Nir Eyal's popular title. So, have you? So, do you have any comments on the naming, or have you ever run into disambiguation problems?
Yeah, definitely. And I wasn't then, and I'm not now, an expert on SEO or search engine optimization. If I'd known then what I know now, definitely would have called it something else. I kind of had to, my publisher was great, but we had a bit of a tussle over the cover. I wanted to put the cute dog on and she didn't. But I kind of got my way, and then she wanted to call it Hooked. And I was like, well, there's already this book. And she was like, no, it's fine. And I didn't fight, but distinctiveness is very important. So if I could go back, I definitely would have called it something else. And Nir Eyal's book is great as well. So it's not super smart of me to have kind of put myself in the same running as that book, which is a bestseller, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he did this, but to your point, or to the point that was made earlier about buying likes, I read an article where there was an author and they spent like $10,000 to buy copies of their own book to get it in the New York Times bestseller list, and then that then made it sell very well and get the person speaking slots and stuff. Obviously, that has nothing to do with Nir Eyal, but I just remembered it now.
I'm going to jump in there now, Piers, because there was a question a little way back that then got copied by somebody else. Is Laura still with us? Laura?
Hi.
Oh, hi, Laura. Would you like to ask your question yourself? You were chatting about the idea behind behaviour at self-checkouts.
Yeah. So I'm a Londoner living in Helsinki. Having grown up and worked in London for many years, I got used to self-checkout, especially when you're running for a train. But living here in Finland, I've noticed that they introduced self-checkout maybe a couple of years ago now. And putting coronavirus aside, I find it really funny that they're gathering dust. So, I was just interested to know what that says about Finnish community, the psyche here, and also what kind of behavioural intervention would be needed to, to see that they are used. And does that say that sometimes we don't know what's best for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're all irrational, as it were, and these biases have evolved to make us make the best decisions as quickly as possible. However, sometimes they don't kind of catch up with society. So some evolutionary psychologists say that our modern skulls house a Stone Age brain, and an analogy might be moths, which use the light to fly, and that's great for them, or it was for thousands of years, but now we have light bulbs and candles and things, and it's kind of maladaptive. So there are certain things which used to be great for us, may still be, but sometimes they cause us to make decisions that aren't in our best interests. Regarding self-checkout, I'm not sure why, but why that might be, but obviously there are cultural differences. I think it's always really important to, if you're doing an intervention, if you're trying to introduce some nudge or some communication, to actually just go and talk to people in that market. So for example, authority is a hardwired nudge, which is effective the whole world over, but it looks very different in different markets or for different groups. So someone in a lab coat would be authoritative for some people, whereas, I don't know, an influencer or a soldier would be authoritative for other people. So it's really important to understand those cultural nuances. I would imagine it's something to do with wanting to interact with people. People don't really trust machines all that much, or AI. And also there's a health aspect to just talking to other people and bonding with them. There's oxytocin is released when you're interacting socially with people, the love hormone, that's called. One of my students did do a study for her dissertation, where she looked at people buying products with a real person versus with self-checkout. And with the self-checkout, because there wasn't that human interaction, they were more likely to choose unhealthier products, so to buy kind of cookies rather than fruit. And then a published peer-reviewed study found that people are more likely to buy embarrassing things like condoms when they're going to self-service checkout. So then there's probably some kind, definitely a social interaction aspect to it. How to nudge it then, make them a bit friendlier, have a kind of human aspect to it if possible. But yeah, you'd have to do some research to find out why people aren't using it. And, you know, as much as we love to do these great behavioral science experiments and use big data and stuff, sometimes you just have to talk to people.
Thanks very much, Patrick. And then I don't know if you want to ask this question yourself, Aman. Aman, would you like to ask the question yourself? You were interested in asking Patrick about behavioural science in the corporate domain. Do you want to ask yourself, Aman, or shall I ask it?
Louise, please go ahead. His mic is active.
Okay. So Patrick, Aman was talking about behavioural science, how it's perceived in the corporate domain, which is obviously how you're operating yourself. And he was saying that most of the people that he's spoken with have a strong opinion in that they either truly believe in it, right, or they completely reject it. Yeah. What's your outlook for consulting firms, marketing agencies that are built around ideas, research and concepts in the discussed subjects?
Yeah, I mean, number one, try and find those people who really believe in it, because as clients, they kind of sell themselves and also they evangelize to the rest of the business. They're very, very valuable contacts to have. For the other people, so is that the question where it said some people just see it as common sense, that kind of thing? Or was that someone else?
I think that was someone else, but certainly it is along the same lines, because it's saying they either truly believe in it or completely reject it. So it's a similar thing, yeah.
I mean, when you're doing consumer research, you do it on what's known as category non-rejectors. So people who either buy the product or would be open to buying it, and then the people who completely reject it, well, they've kind of qualified themselves out of your customers there. So why even pursue them? It's just a waste of time if they're completely a brick wall. I would imagine though there are still some kind of undecided, some swing voters in there, and I think the best way to reach them is to be interesting and kind of like I try in the book, to give them things that they can go away and remember and talk to people about, but also to be as scientific as possible and support things with research. Probably the main thing is to prove the effect. So to say that doing this caused a sales uplift or conversion uplift by this percent, do that as much as possible. Even, you know, you can use academic studies where, even though it's in a lab and they measured purchase intention, you can still use that and say, oh, social proof increased purchase intention for the product by 12%. So it's really about improving your approach. And then there are more general kind of sales principles which apply to behavioral science, but to anything really, like demonstrating authority and social proof and liking, building rapport with people, people by people, not businesses, things like that.
Thanks very much. And I'm just going to lower the tone a little bit now. It's all been very academic and fantastic, really interesting things we're talking about, Patrick. But maybe you tell everybody the story you told me when we were chatting about, first of all, we were talking about Bandersnatch, and then you told me a very interesting story about your reaction to a program that you liked very much on television.
Yeah, so it was The Sopranos. Hopefully I won't spoil it. I mean, it is 20 years old at this stage. So The Sopranos, and it's about these mafia types, mafia family really. And the characters are kind of likable in a way, but they're quite selfish and ruthless, as you can imagine. But there was one couple that stood out for me, Christopher and Adriana. They seemed to be the only characters who really liked each other and cared for each other. And you know, they weren't perfect, but they did things for each other and showed they loved each other. And I kind of, I guess I was quite single and lonely at the time, so I really, that really gratified something in me. But anyway, there was, and then I was watching it, binge watching it on Netflix, I think, and Adriana got pulled into a room by the FBI, and they started questioning her really hard, and she threw up. And straight away, my brain did this extremely quick calculation that, okay, if she's been sick, that means she's scared, which means she's going to snitch on the mafia guys, which means she's going to get killed, which means Christopher is probably going to be devastated and end up dying one way or another. And so immediately I made that calculation and switched it off. I went onto YouTube afterwards. It turns out I was completely right. But yeah, it was very, I can't remember why we were talking about it. It was very interesting to me how I could predict it. And also, I think we were talking about facial coding and how you could maybe in the future, you could use it to give people the story ending that you can predict they'll like the most by seeing how they emotionally respond to different characters and situations. So yeah, if that was around, then those two probably would have survived. Yeah,
because we were having the chat about the choice film, which was the Bandersnatch, where you could decide. We could decide. I don't know if anybody else has seen that one. It's not new by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a Black Mirror film, and you get to choose which direction the film goes in. So several people seem quite keen on Devika's question. I'm not sure if, let's have a look, is Devika still with us? Yeah, Devika, would you like to ask the question yourself?
Hi, yeah, sure.
Thanks, Devika. Sorry, yeah. You're just breaking up a little bit, Devika. Just try again and then I'll ask it.
Hello.
No, that's okay.
Hello.
I'll go ahead with Devika's question, which was talking about the product users. Mm-hmm. What would you consider to be the product with the best UX in terms of incorporating behavioral science principles?
Yeah, so I actually I've been trying to digital detox for a good few months now. So nearly all of my non-essential apps I've purged. So I'm probably not really up to date on that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Uber always seemed to be good, always using nudges, using the star ratings. And I remember they'd send you certain, I can't remember what it was, but I remember they were using behavioral science. I remember recognizing that. I'm not sure, to be honest. I don't know enough about modern apps.
So I was just chatting with somebody yesterday, Patrick, and he was saying that if you are a product designer, you're so sort of, you have so many thoughts of products that you can develop. He said he's almost relieved when somebody brings it out before him, because then he can just cross it off and say, great, I can move on to the other thing that's on my mind. I mean, obviously, you know, you're saying you're a very wide reader, very eclectic. Do you sometimes feel that sort of the weight of so many things to read about, or so much to find out about?
Yes, yeah. As I said, I have. I think somebody said there's a name for it, but I buy more books than I read, and I'm also one of the books that I read this year was Fahrenheit 451, and I do get a little concerned about, will books even be around in the future, and if everything's digital. So I mean, not condoning or condemning it either way, but there's a TV show in the UK, Fawlty Towers, and one of the episodes was kind of like blacklisted and removed. I think it got put back, but because it was made in the 80s, I think, and so it didn't have the same sensitivities that we have today, and so the episode was taken away. And then, if you extrapolate that to the future, I mean, and everything's online, then ebooks can be kind of changed very easily and edited, and you don't have any control over that because it's all in your phone or your Kindle or what have you. So I kind of feel this like pressure, if there's a book I like, to buy it and have it in physical form. I don't know, it's just something about it not being able to change and having it as a real thing in my hands that kind of drives me to. So I've gone a bit mad and bought lots of books in the last year or so.
And you were telling us earlier about the way that you structure, if you're working on something, the way to get your decision making process simplified. Is there anything else interesting, Patrick, that you do in terms of choice, or to take choice out of your life to simplify things?
Yeah, so I tend to eat the same meals and wear the same clothes. I mean, obviously, most people wear the same clothes, which is pajamas and a vest most days, because we're all working from home, or lots of us are. But even so, before last year and before that, I would always wear the same outfit every day, kind of jeans, plain t-shirt and a blazer, because I'm sure you've heard of it, but it's decision fatigue. So Steve Jobs would always wear the same outfit. Mark Zuckerberg always wears the same outfit. All of these very small decisions that actually cumulatively deplete your brain power. And there's a study that I was just looking at today, which says that the brain does have limited resources, and it makes better decisions or faster decisions when you've had sugar and energy, because it does actually require this energy to make decisions. So yeah, I try and reduce unnecessary kind of decisions as much as possible, and I try and reduce distractions as much as possible. I do no meetings Monday, where I try not to have meetings on a Monday, so I can just work, because having meetings can be very distracting. And there's all sorts of research on how notifications and text messages and phone calls also deplete your brain power and reduce productivity. So I try to put my phone away as much as I can as well. But yeah, just really bearing in mind that I only have a limited amount of energy, I try and save it for work as much as possible.
And thinking sort of, you're talking about, oh, I might have put this in the book, or, if I was writing it today, I might have put this in. Have you thoughts about another book that you would like to write?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was one, so I'd originally called it No Logos. So there's a play on no logo. I think it needs a better word, but a better title, but it's about logos, which is about logic. And it's kind of the idea as being the antithesis of nudging. Well, nudging's great, and obviously I do believe in it, but I think we've kind of maybe strayed a bit too far from the idea that people can make rational decisions. People can and should think for themselves and think rationally. And I think there are a number of things which potentially inhibit that ability. So like I said, constant notifications, highly emotional advertising, the TV content, maybe diet, all these kind of things. If they can be improved, then maybe people could be more rational, because people seem very kind of emotional in the last 5 years at least. And I think it can hurt to kind of raise consciousness a bit. So yeah, that's the book I would like to write, but I don't know if anyone would publish it or read it.
And you're obviously very confident speaking in front of people, Patrick. You're here with us today, and I've seen lots of various different footage of you speaking to people. You spoke to everybody at Nudge Stock, and not wanting to put you on the spot, Patrick, but you were very honest with me when we had a chat about early days of when you were first speaking, and maybe you'd like, if you don't mind, just sharing that story with me. Shows the humanity in yourself, Patrick.
Yeah, it was in my first real job, which I hated, but it also was the job I stayed at longest. Explain that. Where it was very like good of them to get the junior people chances to speak and things, but I completely froze up, and I couldn't breathe or talk or move or do anything. I had to just say, excuse me, and left the room. But it was a great experience. That's how you learn, you know.
Absolutely. You've been very kind with your time, Patrick, and it's just been an absolute pleasure to have you speak with everybody today and answer everybody's questions. Give us your time. I think you've a favour maybe to ask everybody today. Would you like to just ask Patrick?
Oh yeah, thank you. If you read and liked the book, could you please leave a review on Amazon? If you didn't like it, do not leave a review. No, I'm just joking. Because my publisher's been asking me to get 10 reviews on there for a while. And I have 9. So if you could, that would be really, really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.
And
then putting up the 10th review right away. And guys, before you go in, if you have not started reading the book as yet, please do. You've heard the man himself. The book is really fun. Take it from me. I bought the book too, and I've loved it. I think I'll do a second reading right now of the book. Thank you so much. And personally, this meeting means a lot to me because after 5 years of me speaking about behavioral science, today is the first time my own sister has turned up for a talk and has showed interest in the field. So it feels really nice as she's here in the meeting. Thank you so much, Patrick. She heard your name, and for some reason said, you know what, I think I'm coming in, and I see her pinging me saying, thank you so much. I'm enjoying this. She's getting her book. Thank you all. Louise, you want to do the honors of closing the session for today?
I will do.
We can talk as long as you want, depending on our schedule. We're all here.
So yeah, thank you everybody again for turning up on your Saturdays as well. Thank you, Patrick, for giving us your time on a Saturday. It's just joyful to see all of you turning up each week, bothering to give us your time. And obviously we're very honoured to have the authors agree to come along and speak to you. Just very quickly, we've got a lovely few weeks coming up ahead. We have got Amy Butcher next week as a guest author who will talk to us about her book Engage, Designing for Behaviour Change. The following week we've got a lovely chat with Jez Groom and April Vellicott about their new book Ripple. And then the following week we'll be back with Patrick again, but don't worry, Patrick, you don't have to turn up. This is just us, where we'll do the final real nice chat between ourselves about what we thought about your book, Patrick. You can't turn up then, just in case somebody didn't like it. But so just to thank you all again, and we really appreciate your support. We love your chat in the club, all of your comments in the group, and so I look forward to seeing all of you at the same time if you will join us next week. So thank you very much, and goodbye everybody, and have a lovely end of the day, Saturday, whatever time it is in your part of the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This was really good, really well done. Sai is here, Rahul is here. Rahul, hi, we haven't spoken as yet.
Hi.
It was a very nice session, and you both Prakash, you and Luz, you're doing great.
Thank you, Sai. That's really kind.
So we will be meeting up next Saturday, I think. After that is Ripple. Yeah. After that is the general chat, when we will try to make it the same as last time with breakout rooms. People liked it. They picked and said they enjoyed it.
It was lovely, actually.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And I think it's the last 4 of us. So it's time. It's almost 10 o'clock now.
Yeah. 10 o'clock in India.
Yeah, I'm going to grab my dinner. I think I deserve it. I'm really happy, Louise, because, today my sister turns up, man. I'm like, she knows I work in this field for more than a decade now. In the last 5 years, I actually run a company. It's like, Today she's like, you know what? So she was the one with that question about the queue. So it was Laura, and she was the one who put up the question again saying, by the way, I have also noticed it too. So it is nice. It feels really good. We will convert the world one person at a time. We'll make everyone understand about behavioral science. And Sai, you have started a podcast, was it?
No, not a podcast. I've every week I'm writing one article. So that's what I'm doing now.
Yes,
maybe sometime away.
Nice. And then so Rahul, we'll also chit chat. I think the next time it's almost time, but it's nice to know. I'll keep in mind that that's how we are making new friends out here as a part of this club. And then Louise and me and Piyush and all of us. Yeah, it's really nice. Do type in your experiences and all in the post for the group. What we are doing is we tell everyone is we are not looking for YouTube links or articles as the main, because we also have Google. We can do that ourselves too. Yeah. But when we write down experience saying, I was in a crowded bus or in a crowded metro, and then I wanted a seat and someone was sitting and I told him, can you please offer me a seat? And they obliged, and I was surprised because I simply asked them, right? As if you put us insight like that, which happened to you at work or professionally, and then people respond and tell their stories, and we become more aware of how we can use it in life. I think that's the kind of interaction we're looking in the post. So please feel free.
Absolutely. So you're saying you're encouraging the club members to post insights.
Yeah. I think we should start doing that, Louise. Let us all put down our insights, our stories. And in response, then someone can pick up a bias or a YouTube video or a report and say, by the way, there was research done on this. Yeah. That becomes interesting. But straight up putting up a YouTube link saying, watch this video is, thank you so much. There are about 2 million videos already on YouTube, right? That I think is going to make all of us a really strong community, Louise.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Rahul, please join us with posts of what you have seen. Definitely. Nice.
Definitely. I'll let you guys go because it's only tea time here and it's much later for you guys. So it's been great chatting with you. I'll chat with you later again, Prakash. And have a lovely Saturday, everybody.
You can tell your daughter that there are a few people who like their art, and she's making a few finds.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Really, do tell us.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Take care. Stay safe.
Bye, Prakash. Bye, Rahul.
Bye.